But around 2021, McKinsey had revenue at the $15 billion mark. Here we are in 2024, 25. By the time this year ends, we're going to be 16 billion, just a little bit over. So they've operated in this narrow band of $15 billion to $16 billion in annual revenue, which is great. Any other management consulting firm would absolutely love to post numbers like that. For McKinsey, it is a sense that their revenue has flatlined a little bit. And you did mention their 100-year celebrations, right? Which 2026, that is when they will turn 100. So they had this annual partner gathering, which also doubled up as this kickoff for their 100-year festivities. And for those who were there, who listened to Bob Sternfels, the global managing partner at McKinsey, the de facto leader, you could sense some plain-spoken bravado. His words to his partners were, "We will kick some ass as we start our second century." He was asking people, are you in for this mission? And those who say yes, I can assure you good times are ahead. Because it is also an acknowledgement that the last few years have been rocky, not just from its standpoint of its financial health, but you have to think about some of the challenges and the controversies that McKinsey has had to navigate. The opioid scandal, some of the criticism over their work in China and Saudi Arabia, and even back home here in the US with ICE, for instance. These are questions that were asked and stuff that McKinsey has had to answer, and it presented an unwelcome distraction. But the bottom line is for this firm is when it looks at its numbers, it does realize, people won't like hearing this, but at management levels, that's how they talk about it. It realized that there was some bloat. And the message that's percolating through the firm right now is it's time to get leaner.
I was interviewing with McKinsey when I was in business school. And like second round, they asked me to get up on a whiteboard and sketch out kind of like a business flow model. I just turned to them and said, "Thank you, but no thank you," and walked out the door.
That's not
Anytime
for me.
you bring a whiteboard, I'm out of there. I can't think like an. So I went and traded stocks for a living after that. Shri, why has revenue been flat here? Is there some concern that maybe all this AI spending is taken away from other budgets where maybe I don't need the consulting or?
That's certainly the concern on the forward, perhaps. But just in the last few years, the reality of the industry, and McKinsey in some ways is the flag bearer for the industry, but there are perhaps other major consulting firms that are struggling even more. And the fact is that the demand for traditional consulting services may not be as high as it used to be. Companies and clients are getting cost conscious. When your clients are not able to post great revenue growth, the only other lever that they can pull is expenses, and consulting fees are the first ones thrown out the window, right?
Advertising is the first one, I think.
Advertising, then consulting fees, perhaps.
But is McKinsey's solution so out of the box? I mean, at this point, what McKinsey recommends is kind of dogma in corporate boardrooms. You don't need to hire McKinsey to tell you how to do some of these things.
Look, and I think the way you're framing it is just a little bit more of a polite way of some of the memes that you see out there, right? Which is this idea that all that consulting firms do is prescribe, grow revenue, and cut costs. And in the moment it might be funny, but to some extent it is an oversimplification of what they do, because if you look at the list of clients that they've racked up, we talked about them starting out in 1926, a university professor who advised a local meat packer, Armours and Company. From that, what they've grown up to, they are the go-to advisor to blue chip companies, from Coca-Cola and Goldman Sachs to everyone else, and also countries that span the globe. And a lot of these people are repeat clients. So you have to assume that it's not as simple as rote advice that they're doling out, because for these big companies to turn to McKinsey again and again tells you that they see value in most of what they do. There might be some extreme cases on either side. One, it might be some undesirable work, and two, it might just be obvious advice. But for the most part, they're clearly doing something that companies value and countries value.
Speaking of countries, you mentioned China and Saudi Arabia. China wants its companies to continue to bring in consultants, but they just want them to be homegrown consultants.
Right, and that seems to be the push in China, which is a good job relying on all of these Western firms to figure out how you need to modernize and be ready to compete on a global scale. But they're also encouraging them now to turn to homegrown consulting firms. Saudi Arabia is a completely different channel. We have a person at McKinsey who estimated that in the prior decades, so 2014 to 2024, McKinsey earned at least $500 million a year from the kingdom, which is either with companies affiliated with Saudi Arabia or the government itself. But the challenge in Saudi Arabia is also obvious. You've seen some of the recent headlines where they're pulling back on consulting expenses. Some of these pie-in-the-sky projects are not working out as they had hoped for. And again, consulting fees are going away. And Saudi Arabia had become one of McKinsey's most important clients globally. So that is obviously also a place where they don't necessarily see a lot of room for rapid growth.
Yep. All right, Shri. Thanks so much for joining us, Shri Natarajan.